Billionaire returns home early, finds stepmother kicking his only son. What he does shocks all. The Bentley's engine died with a whisper in the circular driveway of the Worthington estate, its silence swallowed by the oppressive weight of the mansion's towering shadows. Vincent Worthington stepped out into the October chill, his $5,000 Italian leather shoes crunching against frost-kissed gravel. The house loomed before him, a monument to his empire, its Gothic windows staring down like hollow eyes that had witnessed too much. Something was wrong. After 15 years of building his fortune, Vincent had developed an instinct for danger that had saved him from hostile takeovers and corporate assassinations. That same instinct now screamed warnings as he approached his own front door. The security cameras he'd installed after Rebecca's death should have alerted his team to his early arrival. The staff should have been waiting. Instead, the mansion felt abandoned, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Hello, beautiful souls. Before I take you deeper into Vincent's world, I have to ask, where are you watching from tonight? Are you cozy in bed, perhaps with a cup of tea, ready for a story that will grip your heart? I hope you're doing well, and if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in this tale of love, betrayal, and shocking redemption. Vincent paused at the mahogany door, his hand freezing on the brass handle. Through the thick wood, he could hear it, a sound that made his blood turn to ice. A child cry, not the ordinary tears of a scraped knee or a broken toy, but the raw, desperate wailing of someone drowning in pain they couldn't understand. His son, Noah. The key turned with a click that seemed to echo through his chest. Vincent pushed open the door and stepped into his marble foyer, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by Persian rugs worth more than most people's homes. The crying grew louder, more desperate, coming from the West Wing where Noah's specially equipped room was located. But there was another sound now, a woman's voice, sharp and cruel, cutting through the air like a blade. Stop that pathetic whimpering. Do you think anyone cares about your crocodile tears? Vincent's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. That voice belonged to Vivian Cross, the woman he'd married 8 months ago in what he'd convinced himself was a practical arrangement. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and had seemed genuinely interested in helping him care for Noah after Rebecca's tragic death. How wrong he had been. He moved through his house like a ghost, his multi-million-dollar art collection and handcrafted furniture blurring past him. Nothing mattered except the sounds coming from Noah's room, sounds that painted a picture more horrifying than any corporate boardroom battle he'd ever faced. Please, came Noah's voice, barely above a whisper, broken by sobs. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry, please don't. The sentence ended in a sharp cry that drove straight through Vincent's heart like a dagger. His pace quickened, designer suit jacket billowing behind him as he navigated the familiar hallways that suddenly felt foreign and threatening. Family photographs lined the walls, images of happier times when Rebecca was alive, when Noah's smile reached his eyes, when this house felt like a home instead of a mausoleum. Vincent reached Noah's door and pressed his ear against the wood. What he heard next would haunt him for the rest of his life. You useless little cripple. Vivian's voice dripped with venom. Your precious mommy isn't coming back to save you. She's dead, and she died because she was tired of taking care of a burden like you. No, Noah whimpered, his 7-year-old voice breaking. Mummy loved me, she said. The sound of impact, flesh against flesh, cut him off. Vincent's hand shot to the door handle. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. Through the gap under the door, he could see shadows moving, and could hear the distinctive tap-tap-tap of Noah's specially designed crutches against the hardwood floor. Don't you dare talk back to me, Vivian snarled. Your father doesn't want you either. Why do you think he's never here? Why do you think he spends 18 hours a day at the office? Because he can't stand the sight of his broken, pathetic son. Vincent's vision went red. His hands that had signed billion-dollar deals and crushed corporate empires, trembled with a rage so pure it felt like molten steel in his veins. He thought of Rebecca, his first wife, his soulmate, who had died 2 years ago in this very house. She had slipped on the wet marble floor of Noah's bathroom while preparing his evening bath, her head striking the edge of the marble counter with a sickening crack that still echoed in Vincent's nightmares. Rebecca had been the heart of their family, The gentle soul who saw beauty in Noah's uniqueness rather than limitations in his cerebral palsy. She had been getting Noah ready for bed, singing his favorite lullaby, when the accident happened. The last words she'd spoken were Noah's name, a whispered apology for leaving him. In his grief and guilt, Vincent had thrown himself into his work, building his empire higher and wider, as if enough zeros in his bank account could somehow resurrect the woman he loved or fix the son he didn't know how to help. He'd hired the best nannies, enrolled Noah in the most expensive therapy programs, bought him every adaptive device money could purchase. But he'd forgotten the one thing Noah needed most, his father's presence. 8 months ago, when Vivian Cross had walked into his life at a charity gala, she'd seemed like an answer to his prayers. She was elegant, intelligent, and claimed to have experience caring for children with special needs. She'd spoken passionately about wanting to help heal their family, to give Noah the maternal figure he desperately needed. Vincent had been so desperate for someone to fill the void Rebecca had left that he'd ignored every red flag, every subtle sign that Vivian's interest lay more in his fortune than his family. He'd married her in a small, private ceremony, convincing himself it was the right thing to do for Noah's sake. Now, pressed against his son's bedroom door like a spy in his own home, Vincent realized he'd made the most catastrophic mistake of his life. "Maybe if you weren't such a burden," Vivian continued, her voice growing crueler with each word, "your father might actually love you. But look at you, dragging those useless legs around, drooling on yourself, crying like a baby. What man wants to claim a son like that?" Vincent's control snapped. He didn't remember turning the handle or pushing open the door. One moment he was in the hallway. The next he was standing in Noah's doorway, taking in a scene that would be burned into his memory forever. Noah was on the floor, his small body curled into a protective ball, his crutches scattered across the room like discarded weapons. Tears streaked his face, and there was a red mark blossoming across his pale cheek. Vivian stood over him, her perfectly manicured hand raised for another strike, her beautiful face twisted into something ugly and monstrous. She wore a silk dress that cost more than most people made in a year, her golden hair styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless. She looked like a magazine cover, and she was torturing his child. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Vincent saw everything with crystalline clarity, the fear in Noah's wide brown eyes, the cruel satisfaction in Vivian's green ones, the way his son's specially designed bedroom, painted with cheerful dinosaurs and filled with adaptive toys, had become a torture chamber. Then time resumed, and Vincent Cross spoke 2 words that would change everything. "Hello, Vivian." The color drained from her face faster than water from a broken dam. Her raised hand froze midair, and for the first time since he'd known her, Vivian Cross was speechless. But it was Noah's reaction that shattered Vincent's heart. His son didn't run to him for protection. Instead, Noah tried to scramble away, his eyes darting between his father and stepmother with the panicked desperation of a trapped animal who had learned that the people meant to protect him were the ones who hurt him most. What Vincent did next would shock not just Vivian, not just the household staff, not just the lawyers and social workers who would become involved, but Vincent himself. Because in that moment, staring at his broken, terrified son, the billionaire Vincent Worthington died, and someone else entirely took his place. What do you think Vincent should do? Have you ever witnessed someone you trusted betray that trust in the most shocking way? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your insights always amaze me. The question hanging in the air wasn't what Vincent would do to Vivian. The question was whether he could ever forgive himself for what he'd already allowed to happen. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Vincent's presence filled the doorway, 6 feet 2 inches of barely contained fury wrapped in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit. But as he looked at his son, really looked at him for the first time in months, Vincent felt something crack inside his chest that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with devastating recognition. Noah had Rebecca's eyes, the same warm brown that used to light up when she laughed at Vincent's terrible jokes during their college days at Harvard. The same eyes that had sparkled with tears of joy when the doctor first placed their newborn son in her arms, cerebral palsy diagnosis, and all. Rebecca had whispered then, "He's perfect, Vincent. Absolutely perfect." Now those eyes held nothing but terror. Vincent's mind raced backward through time, searching for the moment when everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. It had started 9 years ago when he'd first laid eyes on Rebecca Sullivan at a coffee shop near campus. She'd been a pediatric nursing student with paint-stained fingers and an infectious laugh, helping a little girl with Down syndrome practice her letters at a corner table. Vincent had been instantly smitten, not by her beauty, though she was breathtaking, but by the gentle patience in her voice as she celebrated each small victory. "You don't see limitations, do you?" he'd asked her on their first date, watching her interact with children at a local hospital where she volunteered. "I see possibilities," she replied, her eyes bright with passion. "Every child is fighting their own battle. Our job isn't to fix them. It's to love them exactly as they are and help them become who they're meant to be." Vincent had fallen in love with her philosophy before he'd fallen in love with her, though both had happened faster than a heartbeat. Rebecca had taught him that success wasn't measured in stock prices or acquisition deals, but in the quiet moments when Noah would reach for Vincent's hand during his physical therapy sessions, or the way his son's face would transform with joy when Vincent read him bedtime stories about brave knights and dragons. After Noah's birth, when the doctors explained the extent of his cerebral palsy, the mobility issues, the speech delays, the need for lifelong care, Vincent had watched other fathers crumble under the weight of shattered expectations. But Rebecca had been his anchor. She'd held their son with fierce pride and declared, "This doesn't change anything. He's still ours, and he's still perfect." For 7 beautiful years, they'd been a team. Vincent would leave work early to attend Noah's therapy appointments, learning to operate his son's communication device and celebrating every small milestone as if Noah had just won an Olympic gold medal. Rebecca had transformed their home into a sanctuary of adaptive equipment and boundless love, where Noah's differences were honored rather than hidden. The memory of their last family vacation flashed through Vincent's mind, a trip to Disneyland where Noah had been determined to ride every accessible attraction. Rebecca had worn Mickey Mouse ears and pushed Noah's specialized wheelchair through the park, her laughter mixing with their son's delighted squeals as they soared through It's a Small World for the 4th time. "Again, Mummy. Again." Noah had signed with his limited hand mobility, his communication device forgotten in his excitement. "Anything for my brave knight," Rebecca had replied, kissing the top of his head. That had been 6 months before the accident that stole everything. Vincent could still see Rebecca that final evening, humming Noah's favorite lullaby as she prepared his bath. The marble floors had been newly polished. Vincent's housekeeper had mentioned in passing. Rebecca had been wearing her favorite silk pajamas, the blue ones that matched her eyes, and she'd been so focused on getting the water temperature perfect for Noah's sensitive skin that she hadn't noticed the slippery surface beneath her feet. The sound of her fall had echoed through the mansion like a gunshot. Vincent had been in his office, reviewing quarterly reports that suddenly meant nothing. He'd found her unconscious, blood pooling around her head, while Noah waited in his bedroom, calling out, "Mummy? I'm ready for my bath, Mummy." For 3 days, Vincent had sat beside Rebecca's hospital bed, holding her hand and begging her to wake up. Noah had stayed with Vincent's mother, asking every hour when Mummy was coming home. On the 4th day, Rebecca's doctor had delivered the news that shattered Vincent's world. Extensive brain trauma, no brain activity, no hope of recovery. Vincent had made the hardest decision of his life, honoring Rebecca's wishes to donate her organs. As they'd wheeled her away for the final time, he'd whispered, "I don't know how to do this without you." He'd been right. The grief had swallowed him whole, transforming the devoted father and husband into a workaholic ghost who haunted his own life. Vincent had thrown himself into expanding Worthington Industries with manic intensity, as if conquering new markets could somehow resurrect his wife or ease the constant ache in his chest. 18-hour workdays became the norm. Business trips stretched from days into weeks. Vincent told himself he was securing Noah's future, building an empire that would ensure his son never wanted for anything. What he'd really been doing was running, from Noah's needs, from his own grief, from the overwhelming responsibility of raising a disabled child alone. I have to pause here and ask, have you ever lost someone so important that you forgot how to be yourself? Sometimes grief makes us do things that hurt the very people we're trying to protect. If you're finding this story as emotionally gripping as I am, please share it with someone who might need to hear Noah's story of resilience. That's when Vivian Cross had entered their lives like a beautiful predator, sensing wounded prey. Vincent had met her at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala, an event Rebecca would have insisted they attend together. Vivian had approached him at the bar, stunning in an emerald gown that matched her calculating eyes. She'd claimed to be a former special education teacher with experience, caring for children with disabilities, and she'd spoken with apparent passion about wanting to help families like his. "I've seen too many children suffer when they lose a parent," she'd said, her hand briefly touching Vincent's arm in what seemed like genuine sympathy. "They need stability, routine, someone who understands their unique needs. I've dedicated my life to being that person." Vincent had been so desperate for someone to care for Noah with Rebecca's expertise that he'd ignored every red flag. Vivian's credentials, when he'd bothered to check them months later, had been fabricated. Her experience with special needs children was limited to a brief stint as a substitute teacher before she'd focused her energy on more lucrative pursuits, specifically targeting wealthy widowers who were too grief-stricken to see through her manipulations. But Vincent hadn't known that 8 months ago. He'd only seen a beautiful, articulate woman who claimed to love children and seemed genuinely interested in helping Noah heal. When Vivian had moved into their home as Noah's caregiver, Vincent had felt the first relief he'd experienced since Rebecca's death. That relief had been a cruel illusion. Now, staring at his terrified son curled on the floor like a beaten animal, Vincent realized the full scope of his catastrophic failure. While he'd been building his empire, Vivian had been systematically destroying the one thing that mattered most: Noah's spirit. The red mark on Noah's cheek told a story of repeated abuse. The way his son flinched at Vincent's presence suggested this wasn't the first time Noah had been caught in the aftermath of Vivian's cruelty. Most heartbreaking of all was the resignation in Noah's eyes, as if he'd accepted that this was simply his life now, a life where the people meant to protect him caused him pain instead. "Noah," Vincent said softly, stepping into the room with his hands raised peacefully. "Daddy's here now." But Noah didn't run to him. Instead, his son pressed himself against the wall, his communication device forgotten on the floor beside his scattered crutches. The message was clear. Noah no longer trusted anyone, including his father. Vincent's heart shattered completely as he realized that in losing Rebecca, he'd also lost Noah's faith. And in marrying Vivian, he delivered his son directly into the hands of someone who saw Noah's vulnerabilities not as things to protect, but as weaknesses to exploit. The billionaire who could negotiate million-dollar deals in his sleep, who could read corporate enemies like open books, had been completely blind to the monster living under his own roof. But Vincent's blindness was about to end, and what he did next would prove that sometimes the most shocking transformations happen not in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in the moment when a father finally sees his child's pain clearly enough to act. "Vivian," Vincent said, his voice carrying the dangerous calm that preceded volcanic eruptions, "we need to talk." Vivian Cross had built her entire adult life on reading men's weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. She'd perfected the art of transformation, becoming whatever version of herself would unlock the deepest pockets and most vulnerable hearts. But as she stared at Vincent Worthington in the doorway of Noah's bedroom, she realized she'd made a fatal miscalculation. She'd expected guilt Vincent, the broken widower who would apologize for coming home early and disrupting her disciplinary methods. She prepared for busy Vincent, the distracted executive who would accept her carefully crafted explanation about Noah's behavioral issues and retreat back to his office. She'd even rehearsed responses for angry Vincent, the controlled businessman who might express disappointment but would ultimately prioritize avoiding scandal over protecting his son. The man standing before her was none of those versions. This was someone entirely new and infinitely more dangerous. "Hello, Vivian," Vincent repeated, stepping fully into the room. His voice carried the lethal quiet of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. "Having a good afternoon with my son?" Vivian's training kicked in immediately. Her face transformed into a mask of relieved concern, tears springing to her eyes as if summoned by years of practice. She rushed toward Vincent, her arms outstretched as if seeking comfort from an understanding husband. "Thank God you're home early," she breathed, her voice trembling with perfectly manufactured emotion. "Noah had another one of his episodes. I've been trying everything to calm him down, but you know how he gets when his medication wears off. I was just. Vincent's hand shot up, stopping her mid-sentence and mid-approach. The gesture was so sharp, so absolute, that Vivian froze like a deer caught in headlights. In 15 years of manipulating men, no one had ever cut her off so completely. Don't, Vincent said, the single word carrying enough menace to make Vivian take an involuntary step backward. Don't you dare lie to me about my son. Behind them, Noah had managed to pull himself into a sitting position against the wall, his small hands clutching at his scattered crutches. Vincent could see the boy watching their interaction with the sharp awareness of a child who had learned to read adult emotions as a matter of survival. Noah's eyes darted between his father and stepmother, calculating who represented the greater threat. The fact that his son couldn't immediately answer that question was a knife to Vincent's heart. Vivian's first mask had failed, so she reached for her second, wounded innocence. Her shoulders sagged as if bearing an invisible weight, and her voice took on the tremulous quality of someone barely holding herself together. Vincent, I know this looks bad, but you don't understand what I've been dealing with while you're at work. Noah has been having these violent outbursts, throwing things, hurting himself. The doctor said this might happen as he processes his grief about Rebecca. I've been trying to protect him from. Stop. Vincent's command cut through her performance like a blade through silk. He moved closer, and Vivian found herself backing away despite every instinct that told her to hold her ground. I heard what you said to him, Vivian. Every single word. The color drained from Vivian's face so rapidly that for a moment, Vincent thought she might actually faint. Her carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. Her green eyes darted toward the door as if calculating escape routes, but Vincent's presence blocked her only exit. You heard, she whispered, her voice losing all pretense of sweetness. I heard you call my son a burden, Vincent continued, his voice growing quieter and more dangerous with each word. I heard you tell him that his mother died because she was tired of caring for him. I heard you say that I don't want him because he's broken. Vincent's hands clenched into fists at his sides, and Vivian instinctively stepped back again. She'd seen Vincent angry before, during business calls where deals fell through, during board meetings where competitors gained advantages. But this was something else entirely. This was the fury of a man who had just discovered that the person he'd trusted with his most precious treasure had been systematically destroying it. And then, Vincent said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, I watched you hit him. The accusation hung in the air like a death sentence. Vivian's mind raced through possible responses, excuses, deflections. She could claim it was discipline. She could say Noah had been violent first. She could even try to turn this back on Vincent, make him feel guilty for neglecting his son. But looking into Vincent's eyes, she realized that none of her usual tactics would work. This wasn't the grief-stricken widower she'd married. This was a man who had just discovered the full scope of her betrayal, and she could see in his expression that he was already 10 steps ahead of any lie she might tell. Vincent, she said, dropping all pretense and letting her real voice emerge. Calculating, cold, utterly without remorse. Let's be practical about this. You married me to take care of your son because you couldn't handle the responsibility yourself. If you want someone to blame for Noah's condition, look in the mirror. I've been doing the job you were too weak to do. It was the wrong thing to say. Spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. Vincent moved so fast that Vivian barely registered the motion. One moment he was standing by the door, the next he was inches from her face, his presence overwhelming her senses. She could smell his cologne, could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could feel the barely controlled power radiating from his body. My son, Vincent said, his voice carrying the promise of absolute destruction, is not broken. He never was broken. The only broken thing in this house is the woman who thought she could hurt him and get away with it. Behind them, Noah made a small sound. Not quite a whimper, not quite a gasp. Both adults turned to look at him, and Vincent's heart nearly stopped at what he saw. For the first time since he'd entered the room, there was something other than fear in his son's eyes. It was hope, fragile, tentative, but unmistakably real. Noah had heard his father defend him. More than that, Noah had heard his father choose him. Before I continue with Vincent's next move, I have to ask, what would you do in Vincent's position? Sometimes we think we're protecting the people we love by staying distant, but what they really need is for us to fight for them. Hit that subscribe button if you're feeling the emotional intensity of this moment. Vincent turned back to Vivian, and she saw her own doom reflected in his expression. She'd spent months studying him, learning his weaknesses, exploiting his grief and guilt. But she'd made one crucial error in her assessment. She'd mistaken his love for Noah as weakness instead of recognizing it as the most dangerous force in Vincent Worthington's arsenal. "Here's what's going to happen," Vincent said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had built empires and destroyed competitors. "You're going to walk out of this room. You're going to pack your belongings. And you're going to leave my house within the hour." Vivian laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made Noah flinch. "You think it's that simple? I'm your wife, Vincent. I have legal rights. If you want to divorce me, I'll take half of everything you own. If you try to accuse me of abuse, it's your word against mine, and I'll make sure every judge and social worker knows what an absent father you've been." Vincent's smile was absolutely terrifying in its calm confidence. "You're assuming I'm going to handle this through the legal system." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and for the first time in their conversation, Vivian felt genuine fear. She'd researched Vincent Worthington thoroughly before targeting him, but she'd focused on his financial assets and emotional vulnerabilities. She hadn't delved deep enough into how he'd built his empire, or what kinds of methods he'd used to eliminate obstacles that couldn't be removed through conventional means. "You can't intimidate me," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "I'm not trying to intimidate you," Vincent replied. "I'm giving you a choice. Option 1, you leave quietly, tonight, and disappear from our lives forever. You keep the jewelry I bought you, the car, and enough money to start over somewhere far away from here. Option 2. He let the sentence hang unfinished, but his meaning was crystal clear. Vincent Worthington hadn't built a multi-billion-dollar empire by accepting defeat gracefully. He'd done it by being more ruthless than his opponents, by finding leverage they didn't know existed, by making problems disappear so completely that people forgot they'd ever existed at all. Vivian stared at him, seeing perhaps for the first time the man she'd actually married instead of the grief-stricken Mark she'd thought she was manipulating. This wasn't someone she could control or predict. This was someone who could make her vanish from the face of the earth and sleep peacefully afterward. But what shocked her most wasn't Vincent's transformation, it was Noah's. The little boy had managed to retrieve one of his crutches and was using it to pull himself upright. His movements were slow and deliberate, hampered by his cerebral palsy, but his intent was unmistakable. Noah was positioning himself between his father and stepmother, not to protect Vivian, but to stand with Vincent. For 7 years of his young life, Noah had been cherished and protected. For 2 years after his mother's death, he'd been neglected and ignored. For 8 months under Vivian's care, he'd been systematically abused and convinced that he was worthless. But in this moment, hearing his father finally fight for him, Noah Worthington remembered who he was supposed to be, not a burden, not a broken thing to be hidden away, but a beloved son worth protecting. What Vincent did next would shock everyone in that room, including himself. But more importantly, it would mark the beginning of Noah's journey back to the light, and Vincent's journey back to being the father his son deserved. The war for Noah's soul was about to begin, and Vincent Worthington had just declared himself the general of an army of one. What Vincent did next will be talked about in hushed whispers throughout their social circle for years to come. But in that moment, facing his terrified son and the woman who had tormented him, Vincent Worthington didn't care about social consequences or public perception. He cared about one thing: making sure no one never doubted his father's love again. Vincent pulled out his phone, not to call his lawyers or security team, but to activate the house's intercom system that connected to every room in the mansion. His finger hovered over the button for exactly 3 seconds before he pressed it, broadcasting his voice throughout their home. "Attention, household staff." Vincent's voice echoed through the marble hallways, into the kitchen where their cook was preparing dinner, into the quarters where their housekeeper was folding laundry, into every corner of their world. "Please gather in the main foyer immediately. There's something you all need to witness." Vivian's face went ashen. "Vincent, what are you?" "You wanted to make my son feel worthless and alone," Vincent said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm going to make sure everyone in this house knows exactly what kind of person you are." Within minutes, Footsteps echoed through the hallways as their staff assembled. Maria Santos, their cook, who had been with the family since Noah's birth. James Fletcher, their groundskeeper, who had taught Noah about different flowers in the garden during happier times. Elena Volkov, their housekeeper, who used to help Rebecca organize Noah's therapy equipment with military precision. These weren't just employees. They were people who had loved Noah before his mother's death, who had watched him retreat into silence and fear over the past 8 months, who had suspected something was wrong, but hadn't known how to intervene without risking their jobs. Vincent lifted Noah into his arms, feeling how his son's small body trembled, but also noticing how Noah didn't pull away. For the first time in 2 years, his child was allowing himself to be held. "We're going downstairs," Vincent said to Vivian, "and you're going to tell them what you've been doing to my son." "I won't." "Yes," Vincent interrupted, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "You will." They made a strange procession down the grand staircase, Vincent carrying Noah, whose arms had tentatively wrapped around his father's neck, and Vivian following behind like a prisoner being led to execution. The staff had gathered in the foyer, their faces showing confusion and concern. Maria crossed herself when she saw Noah's tear-stained face and the red mark on his cheek. Vincent set Noah down gently, making sure his son's crutches were within reach, then turned to address the assembled group. "For 8 months," Vincent began, his voice carrying throughout the spacious foyer, "I trusted my wife to care for my son while I was at work. I believed her when she said Noah was having behavioral problems. I believed her when she said he was difficult to manage, that his outbursts were part of his grief process." Vincent's voice grew stronger with each word, and Noah found himself standing straighter, drawing strength from his father's conviction. "Today I came home early and discovered the truth. Mrs. Worthington has been physically and emotionally abusing my son. She has been telling him that his mother died because she was tired of caring for him. She has been convincing him that I don't love him because of his disability." A collective gasp rose from the staff. Maria's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes immediately moving to Noah with heartbreaking compassion. Elena stepped forward unconsciously, as if to shield the boy from further harm. "That's not," Vivian started, but Vincent's raised hand silenced her. "I have security cameras in every common area of this house," Vincent continued, and Vivian's face went completely white. "Every hallway. Every room except bedrooms and bathrooms. The footage will show exactly what has been happening in my absence." It was a calculated bluff. Vincent had disabled most of the interior cameras after Rebecca's death, unable to bear seeing the empty spaces where his wife should have been. But Vivian didn't know that, and her reaction confirmed what Vincent had suspected. Her abuse of Noah hadn't been limited to his bedroom. "Mrs. Worthington," Vincent said, his voice carrying the formal distance of a boardroom termination, "will be leaving our home immediately. She will not be returning. If anyone sees her on the property or near my son again, call security first and me second." James Fletcher, a man of few words who had worked for the family for over a decade, stepped forward. "Sir, if I may, we all noticed changes in Master Noah. We were worried, but we didn't know how to." His voice trailed off, heavy with guilt. "You're not to blame," Vincent said firmly. "I am. I wasn't here to protect my son, and I didn't listen when I should have. That changes now. Can I just say how proud I am of Vincent in this moment? Sometimes it takes incredible courage to admit our failures publicly. If you've ever had to stand up for someone you love against impossible odds, you know exactly how Vincent feels right now. Let me know in the comments if you're feeling this emotional intensity." But Vivian Cross hadn't survived 15 years of manipulation by surrendering easily. With her back against the wall and her carefully constructed life crumbling around her, she reached for her final, most desperate weapon. "How touching," she said, her voice dripping with venom as she looked around at the assembled staff. Vincent finally decides to play Father of the Year after 2 years of neglect. "But tell me, darling husband, what's going to happen when Child Protective Services hears about this? What's going to happen when they learn that you left your disabled son in the care of someone you barely knew? What's going to happen when they discover that you were so absent from your child's life that months of abuse went unnoticed?" The words hit their target with surgical precision. Vincent's confident stance faltered as the implications sank in. Vivian was right. his negligence had enabled Noah's abuse. A competent lawyer could paint him as an unfit father who prioritized his business empire over his son's well-being. "I may be leaving this house," Vivian continued, sensing weakness and pressing her advantage, "but I'll be making some phone calls on my way out." Anonymous tips about neglected children get investigated very thoroughly, especially when the child has special needs and the parent is wealthy enough to cover things up. Noah's grip on his crutches tightened as he sensed the shift in the room's energy. His father's protective strength seemed to waver, replaced by something that looked dangerously like the defeat Noah had seen so often over the past 2 years. But Vincent Worthington hadn't built his empire by folding under pressure, and he wasn't about to start now, especially not with his son watching. "Maria," Vincent said, turning to their cook without taking his eyes off Vivian. "How long have you worked for our family?" 9 years, Mr. Vincent," Maria replied, her voice steady despite her obvious emotional distress. "And Elena?" 12 years, sir," Elena answered. "James?" 14 years, Mr. Vincent." Vincent nodded, then looked around at the assembled staff. People who had watched Noah grow from a baby into a boy, who had celebrated his first steps despite his mobility challenges, who had grieved alongside the family when Rebecca died. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vincent said, his voice regaining its commanding tone, "you are all witnesses to what happened here today. But more than that, you're witnesses to everything that's happened in this house over the past 8 months. You've seen how Noah changed after Mrs. Worthington arrived. You've seen his withdrawal, his fear, his silence." Vincent moved to stand beside Noah, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "When Child Protective Services investigates, and they will, because I'm going to call them myself, they're going to hear from all of you. They're going to hear about how Noah was loved and cared for before Mrs. Worthington arrived. They're going to hear about how his condition deteriorated under her care. They're going to hear about the concerns you had, but didn't know how to voice." Vivian's confident smirk began to fade as she realized what Vincent was doing. "More importantly," Vincent continued, "they're going to hear about what change is starting today. They're going to see that I'm stepping back from Worthington Industries to focus on my son's recovery. They're going to see that I'm hiring the best therapists, the most qualified caregivers, the most experienced advocates for children with disabilities." Vincent knelt down to Noah's level, looking directly into his son's eyes. "And they're going to see that Noah Worthington has a father who will never, ever abandon him again." The promise hung in the air like a sacred vow. Noah's eyes searched his father's face, looking for the lies and disappointments that had become his normal experience with adults. Instead, he saw something he'd almost forgotten existed: unconditional love. "Daddy," Noah whispered, using his voice instead of his communication device for the first time in months. "Yes, son. Are you really going to stay home with me?" Vincent's heart broke and healed simultaneously at the tentative hope in his son's voice. "Every day. We're going to learn to be a family again, just you and me." Noah's response was to drop one of his crutches and reach for his father with his free hand. Vincent caught him immediately, pulling his son into an embrace that felt like coming home after a war. But even in that moment of connection, Vincent could see Vivian calculating her next move. She'd lost this battle, but women like her didn't surrender. They regrouped and attacked from a different angle. What she did next would test not just Vincent's resolve, but Noah's newfound trust in his father. Because Vivian Cross had one more card to play, and it was the cruelest one of all. The war for Noah's future was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. For exactly 97 seconds, Vincent Worthington believed he had won. He held his son in his arms, felt Noah's tentative trust returning, and watched Vivian's manipulation crumble under the weight of truth and witnesses. The household staff stood around them like a protective circle, their loyalty to Noah evident in every concerned glance and gentle word. Then Vivian smiled. It wasn't the practiced, seductive smile she'd worn during their courtship, or the cold, calculating expression she'd shown during their confrontation. This was something else entirely. The satisfied grin of a predator who had been saving her most lethal weapon for exactly this moment. "Actually, Vincent," she said, her voice suddenly calm and sickeningly sweet, "before I pack my things, there's something I think you should know. Something about your precious Rebecca." The name hit Vincent like a physical blow. Noah, still in his father's arms, felt his dad's body tense and looked up with concern. The staff shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in atmosphere, but not understanding its source. "Don't," Vincent warned, his voice deadly quiet. "Oh, but I think I should," Vivian continued, reaching into her designer purse with deliberate slowness. "You see, I've been doing some research into your late wife's accident. Very thorough research. And I've discovered some fascinating inconsistencies." Vincent's blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" Vivian pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents and photographs. Rebecca's medical records from the night she died. The police report from her accident. The autopsy findings. The insurance investigation that was quietly closed without reaching any conclusions. She opened the folder with theatrical precision, letting Vincent see glimpses of official letterheads and medical terminology. "Tell me, Vincent, did you know that Rebecca had called her sister that afternoon? Did you know she was planning to take Noah and leave you?" The world tilted sideways. Vincent's arms tightened around Noah instinctively, as if his son might disappear if he loosened his grip. "That's impossible, is it?" Vivian's voice dripped false sympathy. "Rebecca had discovered your affair with Catherine Stark, hadn't she? Your business partner's wife. The affair that lasted 8 months while your disabled son needed both his parents." Vincent felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. The affair with Catherine had been a moment of weakness during one of Noah's extended hospital stays. A brief, meaningless encounter that had ended almost as soon as it began. Rebecca had never found out. She couldn't have found out. "You're lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Rebecca found the hotel receipts, Vincent. The credit card statements. The photographs Catherine's husband took when he hired a private investigator." Vivian's smile widened as she watched Vincent's world crumble. She was going to divorce you and take Noah somewhere you couldn't hurt him with your neglect anymore. Noah stirred in Vincent's arms, picking up on his father's distress, but not understanding its cause. The little boy's communication device hung around his neck, and he reached for it instinctively, wanting to ask if his daddy was okay. That night, Vivian continued relentlessly. Rebecca wasn't preparing Noah's bath because it was part of their routine. She was preparing it as their last night in this house. She'd already contacted a lawyer. She'd already found an apartment in Portland where they could start over. But she never got the chance, did she? Vincent's mind raced through his memories of that terrible night, searching for signs he'd missed, clues that Rebecca had been planning to leave. She had been quieter than usual in the days before her death. She had spent more time holding Noah, as if memorizing the feeling. She had kissed Vincent goodbye that morning with what he thought was unusual intensity. "The marble floors," Vivian said, producing a photograph from the folder. "Freshly polished that afternoon by Elena, weren't they? But here's what's interesting. The polishing wasn't scheduled. Someone specifically requested it." Elena Volkov stepped forward, her face pale. "Mrs. Vincent called me that afternoon. She said she wanted the floors in Master Noah's wing to be perfect for his bath time. I thought it was strange because she never—" Elena's voice trailed off as the implications hit her. "Rebecca polished those floors herself," Vivian revealed, her voice carrying the weight of a death sentence. "The cleaning supplies were found in the bathroom, not in the storage closet where Elena always kept them. Rebecca Worthington didn't slip accidentally, Vincent. She took her own life rather than spend another day married to a man who betrayed her and neglected their child." The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent felt Noah's small body trembling against him, felt his son's frightened eyes searching his face for reassurance that Vincent couldn't give. The staff stood frozen, processing the horrible implications of Vivian's revelation. "No," Vincent whispered, but even as he denied it, pieces began fitting together in his mind. Rebecca's unusual behavior, her insistence on giving Noah his bath personally that night instead of letting the night nurse handle it. The way she'd said, "I love you both so much," instead of her usual good night when she'd kissed them goodbye. She left a note, Vivian said, producing a folded piece of paper from the folder. Hidden inside Noah's favorite book, the one about the knight who never gave up. She knew you'd read it to him eventually, knew you'd find it when you finally decided to be a father. Vincent's hands shook as he recognized Rebecca's handwriting on the paper. Her words, meant for him alone, now weaponized by a woman who understood exactly how to destroy him. "Vincent, I can't pretend anymore that we're a happy family when you've been building a different life behind our backs. Noah deserves better than parents who lie to each other and a father who sees him as a burden to escape from. I'm taking him somewhere safe, where he can grow up knowing he's loved completely. Don't try to find us. We both deserve better than what you've given us. Rebecca. The note had been dated 3 hours before her death. Vincent's legs gave out. He sank to his knees on the marble floor, the same marble that had killed his wife, with Noah still in his arms. His son's small hands patted his face, trying to comfort a father whose world had just shattered completely. I need to pause here because this revelation changes everything we thought we knew about this family. Have you ever discovered that someone you loved had been planning to leave you? Sometimes the truth is more devastating than any lie. If you're feeling the emotional weight of this moment, please share your thoughts in the comments below. But here's the beautiful irony. Vivian continued, her voice cutting through Vincent's devastation like a blade through flesh. Rebecca's sacrifice was completely meaningless. She died to save Noah from your neglect. And what did you do? You neglected him anyway. You handed him over to me, a stranger, while you buried yourself even deeper in your work. Rebecca died believing she was protecting your son, and instead she left him completely defenseless. Vincent looked up at Vivian through tears he hadn't realized he was crying. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand exactly what you're choosing when you choose Noah, Vivian replied. This little boy isn't just disabled, Vincent. He's cursed. His mother died because of the burden he represented. His father betrayed his family because caring for him was too difficult. And now you want to pretend that love is enough to overcome all of that. Noah had gone completely still in Vincent's arms, and when Vincent looked down, he saw that his son was staring at the note in Rebecca's handwriting. Noah couldn't read all the words, but he recognized his mother's writing, and he could sense the devastation it had caused. Mommy wanted to leave? Noah asked in the smallest voice Vincent had ever heard. The question broke something fundamental inside Vincent's chest. How could he explain to his 7-year-old son that his mother had been planning to take him away? How could he make Noah understand that Rebecca's decision hadn't been about not loving him, but about loving him too much to let him suffer in a broken home? She wanted to protect you, Vincent whispered, pulling Noah closer. She loved you so much that she was willing to give up everything to keep you safe. But she died instead, Noah said, his communication device forgotten as he spoke directly from his heart. She died and left me with people who don't want me. The simple, devastating truth of it hit everyone in the room like a physical blow. Rebecca had died trying to save Noah from exactly the situation he'd ended up in anyway, abandoned by his father and abused by his stepmother. Vivian's smile turned triumphant as she watched father and son process the implications of her revelation. She had accomplished exactly what she'd intended. She'd made Vincent realize that his love for Noah was built on a foundation of lies and guilt, and she'd made Noah understand that even his beloved mother had seen him as a problem that needed to be solved. So here's my new proposal, Vivian said, closing the folder with a snap. I'll keep Rebecca's suicide note to myself. I won't share it with Child Protective Services or the media. I won't let the world know that Saint Rebecca was planning to kidnap your son because she couldn't trust you to care for him. In exchange, you give me what I came here for, $50 million in your silence about what happened today. Vincent stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time the depth of her calculation. She hadn't just married him for his money. She'd researched his family's darkest secrets, prepared weapons of emotional destruction, and planned this moment from the very beginning. And if I refuse? Vincent asked, though he already knew the answer. Then Noah gets to grow up knowing that both his parents saw him as such a burden that one committed suicide to escape him and the other had an affair to avoid him, Vivian said with casual cruelty. Either way, I get what I want. The only question is whether you destroy your son's last happy memories in the process. Vincent looked down at Noah, who was staring up at him with eyes full of questions and fears that no 7-year-old should have to carry. His son needed to believe that at least one parent had loved him unconditionally, that Rebecca's death had been a tragic accident rather than a desperate escape. But Vincent also knew that paying Vivian's blackmail wouldn't make her disappear. It would only teach her that he could be controlled through Noah's pain. She would come back for more money, more concessions, more opportunities to torture them both. The choice before him was impossible. Destroy his son's faith in his mother's love, or remain forever trapped by a woman who had turned their family's greatest tragedy into her personal weapon. What Vincent chose to do next would determine not just his own fate, but whether Noah would grow up believing he was worthy of love or convinced he was the cause of everyone's pain. The midpoint revelation had changed everything. The question now was whether Vincent Worthington had the strength to choose the harder path for the sake of his son's future, or whether Vivian Cross had finally found the perfect weapon to destroy them both. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 8 times, each toll echoing through the mansion like a funeral bell. Vincent remained on his knees on the cold marble floor, Noah clutched in his arms, while Vivian stood over them both like a beautiful executioner savoring her victory. The household staff had withdrawn to the edges of the room, their faces etched with horror and helplessness as they witnessed their employer's complete destruction. Maria crossed herself repeatedly, whispering prayers in Spanish. Elena wept silently, her guilt over the polished floors adding another layer to the tragedy. James stood with his hands clenched into fists, his protective instincts warring with his powerlessness to help. "I'll give you 24 hours to think about it," Vivian said, her voice carrying the satisfied purr of a cat that had finally cornered its prey. "Tomorrow evening, I want $50 million transferred to an account I'll provide, plus a signed statement that our marriage is ending due to irreconcilable differences. No mention of abuse, no accusations, just a quiet divorce between civilized people." She began walking toward the staircase, her designer heels clicking against the marble with mechanical precision. "Oh, and Vincent, if you're thinking about trying to discredit me or fight this, remember that I have copies of everything. Rebecca's note, the police reports, the insurance investigation, even some interesting photographs from your hotel meetings with Catherine. One phone call from me, and Noah's story becomes front-page news. Billionaire's wife commits suicide to escape disabled son. Father's affair the final straw." Vincent's grip on Noah tightened involuntarily, and he felt his son's small body tremble in response. Noah had heard every word, understood enough to know that somehow, some way, he was being blamed for his mother's death. "Daddy," Noah whispered, his voice barely audible, "did I make Mummy sad?" The question shattered what was left of Vincent's composure. Tears he'd been holding back since Rebecca's funeral finally broke free, streaming down his face as he looked into his son's innocent brown eyes that were already beginning to dim with the terrible weight of undeserved guilt. "No, sweetheart," Vincent choked out, his voice thick with anguish. "You never made Mummy sad. You were the light of her life, the reason she smiled every single day." But even as he said the words, Vincent could see doubt creeping into Noah's expression. 7-year-olds couldn't understand the complexities of adult relationships, the way affairs and broken marriages could drive people to desperate choices. All Noah heard was that his mother had wanted to leave, and in his young mind, that could only mean one thing. He hadn't been good enough to make her want to stay. Vivian paused on the 3rd step, looking back with mock sympathy. Poor little Noah. First his mother dies trying to escape him, then his father abandons him for work, then his stepmother. Well, we all know how that turned out. It's almost like he's cursed, isn't it? "Get out," Vincent said, his voice raw with pain and rage. "Oh, I will," Vivian replied cheerfully. "But I'll be back tomorrow evening for your answer. Choose wisely, Vincent. Your son's entire understanding of whether he was loved or hated depends on what you decide." She disappeared up the staircase, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like the entire house was holding its breath. Vincent could hear her moving around upstairs, packing her belongings with the casual efficiency of someone who had always known this day would come. "Sir," Maria ventured quietly, stepping forward with tears in her eyes. "Master Noah, he is good boy. Very good boy. His mama, she loved him so much." "I know," Vincent whispered, but the words felt hollow. How could he explain that knowing and proving were 2 different things? How could he tell his son that Rebecca's love had been real when her final acts suggested otherwise? Noah had gone completely still in Vincent's arms, his communication device hanging silent around his neck. When Vincent looked down, he saw that his son was staring at nothing, his young mind trying to process the impossible weight of adult tragedy. "Noah," Vincent said gently, "talk to Daddy." But Noah didn't respond. He'd retreated so far into himself that Vincent wasn't sure he could be reached. The little boy who had been tentatively trusting his father just minutes ago had disappeared, replaced by a child who looked like he was drowning in plain sight. Vincent carried Noah to the living room and settled onto the couch, keeping his son close while his mind raced through impossible calculations. $50 million was nothing. He could make that transfer with a phone call. But paying Vivian wouldn't make her disappear. It would only prove that she could control him through Noah's pain. She would come back again and again, each time with new demands and fresh threats. But if he refused to pay, if he called her bluff, Noah would grow up knowing that his mother had seen him as such a burden that she'd chosen death over caring for him. The boy would carry that weight for the rest of his life, wondering what was wrong with him, that even his own mother couldn't love him enough to stay. Friends, I have to pause here because this is one of those moments that tests everything we believe about love and sacrifice. What would you do if protecting someone you loved meant destroying their faith in someone else they loved? Sometimes there are no good choices, only the choice of which price we're willing to pay. Let me know in the comments what you think Vincent should do. Hours passed. The staff eventually retired to their quarters, leaving Vincent alone with his son and his impossible decision. Noah had fallen into an exhausted sleep in his father's arms. But even unconscious, his small face was creased with worry lines that no child should ever have to wear. Vincent's phone buzzed with messages, business emergencies that once would have sent him rushing to his office, now completely meaningless in the face of his son's crisis. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the gentle rise and fall of Noah's breathing and the terrible weight of the choice before him. At midnight, his phone rang. Catherine Stark's name appeared on the screen, and Vincent answered without thinking. "Vincent, thank God." Catherine's voice was breathless with panic. "David found out about us. He's threatening to go public, to destroy both our families. I need you to." Vincent hung up without saying a word. The affair that had started this catastrophic chain of events felt like something from another lifetime, a mistake made by a man who no longer existed. Catherine's problems, David's threats, her social embarrassment, her marriage, none of it mattered anymore. Nothing mattered except the sleeping child in his arms and the choice that would define both their futures. He thought about Rebecca, trying to reconcile the woman he'd married with the person Vivian had revealed her to be. Rebecca had been the strongest person he'd ever known, a woman who saw possibilities instead of limitations, who fought for Noah's rights with the fierce determination of a mother bear protecting her cub. Could that same woman really have given up hope so completely that she'd chosen death over fighting for their son? Or was there something Vivian wasn't telling him? Vincent's mind began working the way it did during complex business negotiations, searching for gaps in his opponent's story, looking for leverage he might have missed. Vivian was too confident, too satisfied with her victory. In his experience, people who were that certain of their position usually had something to hide. The suicide note troubled him most. Rebecca had been left-handed, but the writing in the note looked different from her usual script, more careful, more deliberate. And why would she have hidden it in Noah's book instead of leaving it somewhere Vincent would find it immediately? But even if the note was forged, even if Vivian was lying about some of the details, the core facts remained devastating. Rebecca had been planning to leave him. She had discovered his affair. She had died on the same day she was supposed to take Noah and start a new life. At 3 a.m, Noah stirred in Vincent's arms and opened his eyes. For a moment, he looked confused, as if he'd forgotten where he was or why his father was holding him. Then the memories came flooding back, and his small face crumpled with grief. "Daddy," he whispered, "am I bad?" The question hit Vincent like a physical blow. "No, Noah, you're not bad. You're perfect. Then why did Mummy want to leave me?" Vincent looked down at his son, this beautiful, brave, extraordinary child who had endured more pain in his 7 years than most adults face in a lifetime, and realized that no amount of money was worth Noah believing he was unloved. "She didn't want to leave you, sweetheart," Vincent said, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his heart. "She wanted to take you with her, to keep you safe. That's what mommies do. They protect their babies, no matter what. But she died instead," Noah said, his communication device finally coming to life as his emotions overwhelmed his ability to speak clearly. The synthetic voice added an eerie quality to his words. And now everyone knows I'm the reason families break. Vincent's heart shattered completely at his son's devastating self-awareness. At 7 years old, Noah was already internalizing the idea that he was a burden, that his existence caused suffering for the people who should love him most. This was Vivian's true cruelty, not just the blackmail, not just the money, but the psychological warfare she'd wage against a disabled child who had no defenses against her manipulations. She had taken Noah's greatest vulnerability, his need to be loved and accepted, and turned it into a weapon against him. Vincent made his decision at that moment, not as a businessman calculating costs and benefits, but as a father who had finally learned the difference between protecting his son and protecting himself. "Noah," he said, his voice carrying newfound strength, "tomorrow we're going to do something very brave. We're going to tell the truth, all of it, even the parts that hurt. And we're going to trust that people who really love us will understand that sometimes families go through terrible things, but love is still real even when everything else is broken." Noah looked up at him with those beautiful brown eyes, searching his father's face for the strength to believe in something better than the nightmare Vivian had created. "Will you stay with me?" Noah asked. "Always," Vincent promised. "No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, I will never leave you. That's a promise from your daddy to you. And daddy's promises are forever." For the first time in hours, Noah's expression lightened slightly. "Forever. Forever and a day," Vincent confirmed, using the phrase Rebecca used to say when she tucked Noah into bed. But even as he made the promise, Vincent knew that tomorrow would bring the hardest test of his life. He was about to go to war with a woman who held weapons capable of destroying everything Noah believed about his mother's love. The battle ahead would be brutal, public, and potentially devastating for them both. Yet for the first time since finding Noah on his bedroom floor, Vincent felt something other than despair. He felt purpose, not the hollow drive for wealth and success that had consumed him for 2 years, but the deep, primal need to protect his child from anyone who would try to break his spirit. Vivian Cross had made one crucial error in her calculations. She'd assumed that Vincent would choose the easier path, that his love for Noah could be weaponized and controlled through fear and guilt. She was about to learn that a father protecting his child was the most dangerous opponent she'd ever faced. The darkest hour was ending, and dawn, though still dangerous and uncertain, was finally beginning to break. Dawn broke over the Worthington estate like a promise of redemption, its golden lights streaming through the living room windows where Vincent had spent the entire night holding his son. Noah had slept fitfully, his small body occasionally trembling with dreams that were probably nightmares. But he'd stayed curled against his father's chest, as if drawing strength from their connection. Vincent hadn't slept at all. Instead, he'd spent the dark hours doing what he did best, strategizing, planning, and preparing for the most important battle of his life. By the time the sun painted the mansion's marble floors with warm light, Vincent Worthington had transformed from a desperate man backed into a corner, into a general preparing for war. The first call he made was to Marcus Reed, his head of security and former Navy SEAL who had been with Worthington Industries for 8 years. Marcus answered on the first ring, his voice alert despite the early hour. "Sir, is everything all right?" "Marcus, I need you at the house in 20 minutes. Bring your forensics contact and the private investigator we used for the Blackstone merger. We have a situation that requires immediate and absolute discretion." "On our way, sir." The second call went to Dr. Sarah Chun, Noah's pediatric psychologist, who had been trying to reach Vincent for months concerning changes in Noah's behavior and emotional state. "Vincent," Dr. Chin's voice carried both relief and concern. "I've been trying to schedule an appointment. Noah's recent sessions have shown significant regression in his emotional development, and I believe there may be some environmental factors. Dr. Chun, I need you to come to the house this morning. There's been a situation, and Noah is going to need intensive support. Also, I need you to bring your colleague who specializes in trauma recovery, the one you mentioned who works with children who've experienced abuse." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with implication. "Vincent, are you telling me that Noah has been—" "Yes," Vincent said simply. "And we're going to fix it. All of it." The third call was the most important. Vincent dialed a number he'd memorized years ago, but had never used. The direct line to Amanda Cross, Vivian's estranged sister who had tried to warn him about Vivian's true nature during their wedding reception. Vincent Worthington. Amanda's voice was cautious, but not surprised. I wondered when I'd hear from you. Amanda, I need to know everything. Every detail about your sister's history, every family she's destroyed, every lie she's told. I'm done being her victim, and I'm done letting her hurt my son. Finally, Amanda breathed, and Vincent could hear years of frustration in that single word. I'll be there in 3 hours. And Vincent, bring a lawyer. What I have to tell you is going to require legal documentation. By 8 in the morning, Vincent's team had assembled in his study like a council of war. Marcus Reed stood near the window, his imposing presence radiating protective energy. Dr. Chin sat beside Noah on the couch, gently encouraging him to play with his communication device while she observed his responses to different emotional cues. Amanda Cross, a woman who looked like a kinder, softer version of Vivian, spread documents across Vincent's mahogany desk with the methodical precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years. Vivian isn't my sister's real name, Amanda began without preamble. She was born Victoria Cross, but she's used at least 6 different identities over the past 15 years. Each time she targets a wealthy widower or divorced father, particularly one with children who might be seen as difficult or burdensome. She opened a thick folder containing photographs, legal documents, and police reports. Her pattern is always the same. She researches her targets thoroughly, finds their emotional vulnerabilities, and positions herself as their salvation. Then she systematically isolates them from their support systems while abusing any children in the home. Vincent's jaw tightened as Amanda continued. She's done this 7 times before you, Vincent. 7 families destroyed, 12 children traumatized, and over $30 million stolen through blackmail and fraudulent divorce settlements. Marcus stepped forward, studying the police reports. Why hasn't she been arrested? Because she's brilliant at covering her tracks, Amanda replied. She never leaves physical evidence of abuse. She manipulates children into believing they deserve the treatment they receive. And she always has leverage, affairs, business scandals, family secrets that keep her victims silent. Dr. Chin looked up from her gentle interaction with Noah. This explains Noah's behavioral patterns perfectly. The selective mutism, the regression in motor skills, the hypervigilance around adult emotions. These are classic signs of sustained psychological abuse. But this time is different, Vincent said, his voice carrying deadly determination. This time she made 2 crucial mistakes. Amanda raised an eyebrow. Which are? First, she underestimated how much I love my son. And second, she gave me exactly 24 hours to prepare my counterattack. Vincent moved to his desk and pulled out his own folder, thicker than Amanda's and far more damaging. While Vivian was upstairs packing last night, I made some calls. It's amazing what information becomes available when you have unlimited resources and a very motivated private investigation team. He opened the folder to reveal bank records, phone transcripts, and hotel surveillance footage. Vivian's been planning this for months. She researched Rebecca's medical records, hired actors to pose as former colleagues, and even had someone break into our safety deposit box to photograph personal documents. Marcus examined the surveillance footage with professional interest. She had help. This level of coordination requires a team. 3 people, Vincent confirmed. A private investigator named Derek Walsh, a document forger called Elizabeth Stone, and Vivian's boyfriend of 2 years, a man named Tony Rossetti who specializes in long-term financial scams. Amanda stared at the evidence with growing amazement. How did you gather all this in one night? I didn't sleep, and I have very good people, Vincent replied. But more importantly, I finally started thinking like a father instead of like a victim. I have to pause here and ask, have you ever had a moment where you realize you were stronger than you thought? Sometimes our greatest power comes not from what we can afford, but from what we refuse to accept. If you're feeling Vincent's transformation from victim to warrior, let me know in the comments. Dr. Chin had been quietly working with Noah throughout the conversation, using play therapy techniques to help him express emotions he couldn't verbalize. Now she looked up with something approaching hope in her eyes. Vincent, Noah's responses are remarkable. Despite everything he's endured, his core sense of self is still intact. With proper support and therapy, he can not only recover from this trauma, but emerge stronger than before. Noah looked up at the mention of his name, his communication device ready in his small hands. "Is the bad lady going to come back?" the synthesized voice asked. Vincent knelt down beside his son, taking Noah's free hand in both of his. "The bad lady made a big mistake, Noah. She thought Daddy was weak, but she was wrong. Daddy is very, very strong when it comes to protecting you." "Are you going to fight her?" Noah asked, his natural voice emerging for the first time that morning. "We're going to do something better than fight her," Vincent replied. "We're going to tell the truth so loudly and clearly that everyone will know exactly what kind of person she really is. And then we're going to help other daddies and children, so this never happens to anyone else." Noah considered this for a moment, his young mind processing the concept of truth as a weapon more powerful than violence. "Will you tell them about Mummy?" Vincent's heart clenched, but his resolve didn't waver. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to tell them that Mummy loved you so much that she was willing to take you away from a daddy who wasn't being a good daddy. And we're going to tell them that even though Mummy made a mistake that hurt everyone, her love for you was the most real thing in her whole life." "What about the note?" Noah asked, his communication device helping him express complex thoughts his voice couldn't quite handle. Amanda leaned forward with interest. "What note?" Vincent explained Vivian's revelation about Rebecca's suicide note, watching Amanda's expression grow increasingly skeptical as he described its contents and supposed hiding place. "That's impossible," Amanda said flatly. Vivian, whatever she's calling herself now, she's used forged suicide notes in at least 3 of her previous scams. It's part of her signature pattern. She researches the deceased spouse's handwriting, creates a note that maximizes guilt and psychological damage, then uses it as leverage. Dr. Chin nodded in agreement. "The hiding place doesn't make psychological sense either. If Rebecca was planning to leave you and take Noah, she would have left the note where you'd find it immediately, not hidden in a place that might never be discovered." Vincent felt a weight lifting from his chest that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. "So Rebecca didn't commit suicide?" "Almost certainly not," Amanda confirmed. "What probably happened is exactly what you originally believed. A tragic accident involving slippery floors and a woman who was rushing to care for her child." Noah had been listening to this conversation with the intense focus of a child whose entire world was being rebuilt in real time. "So Mummy didn't want to leave me. She might have wanted to take you somewhere safe while Daddy learned how to be a better daddy," Vincent said carefully. "But she never, ever wanted to leave you. The difference is very important, Noah. Taking you with her means she loved you. Leaving you behind would have meant she didn't, and your mummy would never, ever have done that." The communication device remained silent for a long moment as Noah processed this distinction. When he finally spoke, it was with his natural voice, clear and strong. "I want to help you fight the bad lady." Vincent's eyes filled with tears of pride and overwhelming love. "You already are, son. Just by being brave enough to tell the truth, you're the strongest fighter on our whole team." At exactly noon, Vincent's phone rang. Vivian's number appeared on the screen, right on schedule. Vincent answered the call and immediately switched it to speakerphone so everyone in the room could hear. "Hello, Vincent." Vivian's voice purred with satisfaction. "I trust you've had time to consider my offer." "I have indeed," Vincent replied, his voice calm and businesslike. "And I have a counteroffer for you." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "I'm listening." "You have 30 minutes to return to this house and surrender yourself to the police officers who are currently parked in my driveway. In exchange, I won't press charges for fraud, blackmail, child abuse, or the theft of personal documents from my safety deposit box." "You're bluffing," Vivian said, but Vincent could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "Amanda Cross is sitting in my study," Vincent continued pleasantly. "She's brought quite an interesting collection of documents about your previous marriages and the 12 children you've abused. My forensics team has confirmed that Rebecca's supposed suicide note is a forgery, created using a handwriting analysis program and printed on paper that didn't exist when my wife was alive." The silence this time was absolute. "Oh, and Vivian, Tony Rossetti and Derek Walsh were arrested this morning for breaking and entering. Elizabeth Stone is currently cooperating with federal authorities in exchange for immunity. Your entire operation has been dismantled." When Vivian finally spoke, her voice had lost all pretense of sweetness. You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll disappear, and I'll take everything I know about your family with me. In 5 years, when you're least expecting it, I'll be back." Vincent's smile was visible in his voice as he delivered his final blow. "No, Vivian, you won't. Because starting tomorrow morning, Noah's story is going to be featured on every major news network, every social media platform, and every family advocacy website in the country. Not as a victim story, but as a survivor story. The story of a brave little boy who helped catch a serial predator who targeted disabled children." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "Your photograph, your real name, your entire criminal history, it's all going public. You'll never be able to target another family, because everyone will know exactly who you are and what you do." The phone line went dead, but Vincent wasn't finished. He had one more call to make, to the producer at 60 Minutes who had been trying to interview him for years about his business success. "This is Vincent Worthington," he said when she answered. "I'd like to tell you a story about love, betrayal, and the power of a father's determination to protect his child. Are you interested?" 3 hours later, the police reported that Vivian Cross had been arrested at the airport, attempting to board a flight to Switzerland with false identification and $2 million in untraceable cryptocurrency. As Vincent tucked Noah into bed that night, his son looked up at him with eyes that were beginning to sparkle with something they hadn't held in months: hope. "Daddy," Noah said, his communication device resting and used on his nightstand. "Are we going to be okay?" Vincent kissed his son's forehead and smiled with absolute certainty. "We're going to be more than okay, Noah. We're going to be happy." The turning point was complete. Father and son had chosen truth over comfortable lies, courage over convenient silence, and love over fear. The war was far from over, but Vincent Worthington had finally become the father his son deserved, and Noah had learned that he was worth fighting for. 6 months later, Vincent Worthington stood in the wings of the Chicago Convention Center, watching his son address 3,000 child advocacy professionals, social workers, and families affected by abuse. Noah sat confidently in his specialized wheelchair, a sleek, high-tech model he'd chosen himself because it looked like something a superhero would use, with his communication device upgraded to include video capabilities that projected his words onto the massive screens flanking the stage. "My name is Noah Worthington," the synthesized voice announced, but everyone in the auditorium could see Noah's lips moving as he spoke his own words simultaneously, his natural speech having improved dramatically through intensive therapy. "6 months ago, I thought I was broken. Today, I know I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be." Vincent felt tears prick his eyes as he watched his son. This remarkable, resilient child who had survived more trauma than most adults ever faced, command the attention of thousands with his quiet strength and profound wisdom. The transformation in Noah over the past 6 months had been nothing short of miraculous. Dr. Chun had warned Vincent that recovery from sustained psychological abuse could take years, that setbacks were normal, and that Noah might never fully trust again. But Noah had surprised everyone, including his doctors, with his capacity for healing when surrounded by genuine love and unwavering support. "The bad lady told me that I was the reason my mummy died," Noah continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "She told me that nobody could love a broken boy like me. She made me believe that taking up space in the world was something I should feel sorry for." On the screen, Noah's face was radiant with confidence, his brown eyes, so much like Rebecca's, shining with the light that had been missing for too long. He was wearing his favorite shirt, the one with the cartoon knight that Rebecca had bought him years ago, and Vincent could almost feel his late wife's presence in that moment, proud and beaming at their son's courage. "But my daddy taught me something important," Noah said, pausing to look directly into the camera that would broadcast this moment to millions of viewers worldwide. "He taught me that broken things can still be beautiful, and that being different doesn't make you less worthy of love." The audience erupted in thunderous applause, but Noah wasn't finished. He waited for the noise to die down, then activated a video clip on his communication device. Vincent's own voice filled the auditorium, recorded during one of their therapy sessions with Dr. Chun. "Noah, do you know what I see when I look at you? I see a boy who fights every single day to do things that other people take for granted. I see someone who faces challenges with more bravery than grown men in boardrooms. I see my son, not my disabled son, not my special needs son, just my son, and he is the most extraordinary person I have ever known. Vincent remembered that session vividly. It had been during Noah's darkest period, 3 months after Vivian's arrest, when the full scope of the psychological damage had become clear. Noah had been convinced that his father was only being kind out of pity, that deep down Vincent still saw him as a burden. Dr. Chun had suggested the recorded affirmations as homework. Vincent was to record himself speaking directly to Noah about his love and pride, so Noah could replay the messages whenever doubt crept in. What had started as a therapeutic exercise had become a library of over 200 recordings, each one more heartfelt than the last. That recording saved my life, Noah told the audience as his father's voice faded. Not because it told me I was perfect, but because it told me I was loved exactly as I am. And that's what I want every kid to know. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love. Friends, I'm getting emotional just watching Noah's transformation. This is what happens when love gets backed by action, when parents decide to fight for their children instead of fighting their own shame. If Noah's courage is inspiring you as much as it's inspiring me, make sure you're subscribed because stories like this remind us why we never give up on love. Backstage, Vincent was surrounded by the team that had become their extended family over the past 6 months. Dr. Chin stood beside him, wiping away tears as she watched her young patient exceed every expectation. Marcus Reed, now officially head of security for the newly formed Worthington Foundation for Abused Children, coordinated with the venue's security team to manage the overwhelming media attention Noah's story had generated. Amanda Cross, who had become like an aunt to Noah and a trusted friend to Vincent, reviewed the foundation's latest statistics on her tablet. "Vincent, you need to see this," she said, her voice filled with amazement. The foundation has received over 50,000 tips about suspected child abuse since Noah's first interview aired. We've helped law enforcement make 237 arrests and rescued over 400 children from abusive situations. Vincent shook his head in wonder. What had started as a desperate attempt to save his own son had evolved into a movement that was protecting children across the country. The Worthington Foundation had become the largest privately funded child advocacy organization in North America, with Noah serving as its youngest and most powerful spokesperson. And the legal proceedings? Vincent asked, though he already knew the answer would be satisfying. Vivian, Victoria Cross, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison yesterday. Amanda reported with grim satisfaction. No possibility of parole. The judge called her a predator of the worst kind and recommended she never be allowed near children again. The investigation into Vivian's criminal network had revealed a scope of abuse that had shocked even seasoned law enforcement officials. 12 children across 7 states had been systematically tortured and manipulated, their wealthy fathers blackmailed into silence through threats of scandal and social ruin. The FBI had called it the largest organized child abuse conspiracy they'd ever uncovered. But perhaps more importantly, all 12 children were now in therapy and showing signs of recovery. The foundation had covered all their treatment costs and connected their families with support networks that ensured no child would suffer in silence again. On stage, Noah was fielding questions from the audience with the poise of someone 3 times his age. A social worker from Detroit stood at the microphone, her voice trembling with emotion. "Noah, what would you say to a child who is currently being hurt by someone they're supposed to trust?" Noah didn't hesitate. "I would tell them that it's not their fault, and that keeping the secret isn't protecting anyone. It's only protecting the person who's hurting them. I would tell them that telling the truth might be scary, but staying silent is scarier." He paused, his communication device translating his thoughts with perfect clarity. "And I would tell them that somewhere in the world, there's a daddy like mine who is looking for them, who will fight for them, who will never give up until they're safe." Vincent's phone buzzed with a text message from his assistant. "Sir, the president's office called again. They'd like to schedule a meeting about federal funding for the foundation's expansion. Also, the documentary about Noah's story has been nominated for an Emmy." Vincent smiled and silently declined the call. 6 months ago, meeting the president would have been the pinnacle of his ambitions. Now, watching his son inspire thousands of people to become better advocates for vulnerable children, Vincent realized he'd already achieved something far more meaningful than any political recognition. A young girl, maybe 8 years old and wearing leg braces similar to Noah's mobility equipment, approached the microphone with her mother's help. Noah, do you still get scared sometimes? Noah's face softened with understanding. Every day, he answered honestly, but being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. The difference is that now when I get scared, I have people who remind me that I'm safe and that I'm loved and that being afraid doesn't make me broken. The girl nodded solemnly, and Vincent watched her mother mouth, "Thank you," toward the stage, tears streaming down her face. After Noah's presentation ended and they'd navigated through the crowd of well-wishers, reporters, and foundation supporters, Vincent and his son found themselves alone in the hotel suite they were sharing. Noah had insisted he didn't need his own room anymore. The nightmares that had plagued him for months after Vivian's abuse had finally stopped, but he still preferred having his father close by. "Daddy," Noah said as Vincent helped him transfer from his wheelchair to the hotel bed, "do you think Mummy would be proud of what we're doing?" Vincent sat on the edge of the bed and pulled his son close, just as he'd done every night for the past 6 months. "I think Mummy would be amazed by how brave and strong you've become. And I think she'd be proud that we turned something terrible into something that helps other families." Noah was quiet for a moment, processing this with the thoughtfulness that had become his trademark. "Do you still miss her?" "Every day," Vincent replied honestly. "But now when I miss her, I also feel grateful for the time we had together and for the amazing son she gave me, even though I'm different." Noah asked, though the question no longer carried the desperate need for reassurance it once had. "Especially because you're different," Vincent said, kissing the top of his son's head. "Your differences make you extraordinary, Noah. They make you capable of understanding and helping people in ways that others can't." As Noah drifted off to sleep that night, Vincent stood by the window overlooking Chicago's skyline, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 18 months ago, he'd been a man who measured success in stock prices and corporate acquisitions, who had convinced himself that providing financially for his son was the same as providing emotionally. The man he'd become was someone he barely recognized, and someone he liked infinitely better. Vincent Worthington, CEO, had built an empire. But Vincent Worthington, father, had built something far more valuable. He'd built a son who knew his worth, a foundation that protected vulnerable children, and a legacy that would outlive any corporate dynasty. His phone buzzed with one final message of the day, this one from Dr. Chun. "Vincent, Noah's latest psychological evaluation shows no remaining trauma markers. He's not just recovered. He's thriving beyond normal developmental expectations. You should be incredibly proud of both of you." Vincent smiled and put his phone aside, focusing instead on the gentle sound of his son's peaceful breathing. Tomorrow they would fly home to their mansion, which had been transformed from a monument to wealth into a warm, welcoming home filled with adaptive equipment, therapeutic spaces, and most importantly, laughter. The marble floors that had once been polished to dangerous perfection now featured textured strips for Noah's safety. Rebecca's garden had been converted into a therapeutic playground where children from the foundation could come for healing retreats. Vincent's office had been relocated to the first floor so Noah could visit anytime he wanted to help Daddy save kids. As Vincent prepared for sleep in the chair beside Noah's bed, a nightly routine they'd both grown to cherish, he thought about the choice he'd made 6 months ago. He could have paid Vivian's blackmail and preserved the comfortable lies that protected them from difficult truths. Instead, he'd chosen the harder path of transparency and accountability. That choice had cost him his privacy, some of his business relationships, and his carefully maintained public image. In return, it had given him his son's trust, the knowledge that hundreds of other children were safer because of their courage, and a purpose that made every morning worth facing. The climactic resolution was complete, not with violence or revenge, but with love triumphant and a family reborn through the simple, revolutionary act of a father choosing to truly see his son. Vincent Worthington had once been a man who had everything and felt empty. Now he was a man who had what mattered most and felt complete. The most shocking thing of all was how natural it felt to finally be the father Noah had always deserved. 2 years after the darkest night of their lives, Vincent Worthington woke up to the sound of laughter echoing through their transformed mansion. It was a Saturday morning in late spring, and the house that had once felt like a mausoleum now buzzed with the joyful chaos of children's voices, therapeutic equipment in motion, and the constant hum of purposeful activity. Vincent padded downstairs in his pajamas, a casualness that would have horrified the old Vincent who insisted on being fully dressed before leaving his bedroom. The marble floors now featured colorful runners and textured pathways that made navigation safe and fun for children with mobility challenges. The walls were covered with artwork created by the Foundation's young beneficiaries, each piece a testament to healing and hope. In the kitchen, he found Noah directing a small army of volunteers as they prepared breakfast for the weekend retreat participants. The Worthington Foundation now hosted monthly healing retreats for families affected by abuse, and their home had become a sanctuary where children could laugh, play, and simply be kids without fear. "Morning, Daddy," Noah called out, his voice clear and strong as he supervised Maria's famous pancake production from his position at the adaptive cooking station Vincent had installed. "We're making dinosaur pancakes for the little kids, and Emma requested extra blueberries because she says they're brain food for her college applications." Vincent smiled at the mention of Emma Rodriguez, now 16 and one of Noah's closest friends. She'd been one of Vivian's previous victims, a brilliant girl whose stepfather had been blackmailed into silence while Emma suffered years of abuse. Through the Foundation's intervention, Emma had not only healed but thrived, becoming a straight-A student with early acceptance to Harvard University on a full scholarship the Foundation had established in Rebecca's name. "And where exactly is our college-bound genius?" Vincent asked, accepting a cup of coffee from Maria, who beamed at him with a maternal pride she'd always felt for Noah. "Physical therapy session with Dr. Martinez," Noah replied, his communication device resting and used on his shoulder as he'd learned to rely primarily on his natural speech. "She's helping some of the newer kids with their exercises. Emma says helping others heal helps her heal too." Vincent nodded, understanding the wisdom in that observation. Over the past 2 years, he'd watched dozens of children transform from broken, frightened victims into confident, compassionate advocates. The Foundation's peer support program, pioneered by Noah and Emma, had become a model copied by organizations worldwide. Through the kitchen window, Vincent could see the backyard that had once been Rebecca's pristine garden. It was now a therapeutic playground designed by child development specialists and maintained by the children themselves. Raised garden beds allowed kids in wheelchairs to plant flowers alongside those who could run and climb. Adaptive swings accommodated every type of mobility challenge. A sensory path wound through the space, providing calming stimulation for children with neurological differences. In the center of it all stood a bronze statue, not of a businessman or corporate titan, but of a woman reading to a child. The plaque at its base read, "In memory of Rebecca Worthington, who saw possibilities instead of limitations. Her love continues to heal hearts and change lives." "Daddy," Noah said, rolling his wheelchair over to where Vincent stood. "Mrs. Patterson called earlier. She wants to know if you can speak to her husband about Marcus." Vincent's expression grew serious. Mrs. Patterson was a social worker in Denver whose disabled son Marcus, no relation to Marcus Reed, had been showing signs of abuse from his stepfather. She'd contacted the Foundation after seeing Noah's documentary, desperate for advice on how to help her boy without destroying her family. "What did you tell her?" Vincent asked, kneeling down to Noah's eye level, a habit he developed to ensure his son never had to crane his neck to have important conversations. "I told her that sometimes families have to break apart so they can heal properly and come back together stronger," Noah replied with a wisdom that continued to amaze everyone who knew him. "And I told her that protecting Marcus is more important than protecting her marriage to someone who hurts children." Vincent felt the familiar surge of pride that filled his chest every time Noah demonstrated the emotional intelligence that had emerged from his trauma. His son had become not just a survivor, but a healer, someone whose own pain had been transformed into a gift for helping others. "I'll call her this afternoon," Vincent promised. "Maybe we can arrange for Marcus to come to our next retreat. Let him meet some other kids who understand what he's going through." The sound of a car in the driveway drew their attention, and Noah's face lit up with excitement. "That's Dr. Chun. She's bringing the new family from Portland, the one with the little girl who hasn't spoken since her stepdad was arrested." Vincent watched through the window as Dr. Chun emerged from her car, followed by a nervous-looking woman and a small girl who clung to her mother's hand like a lifeline. The child was maybe 5 years old, with tangled hair and the hollow, watchful eyes Vincent had learned to recognize in recently rescued abuse victims. "Her name is Lily," Noah said quietly, moving his wheelchair toward the front door. "She reminds me of me, back when I thought I was broken. Can I just pause to say how incredible this journey has been? From a billionaire who thought success meant stock prices to a father whose greatest achievement is his son's wisdom. This transformation reminds us that our most important legacy isn't what we accumulate, but how we love." If you've been following Noah's story from the beginning, drop a comment and let me know what moment touched your heart the most. Vincent followed his son to greet their newest guests. Watching Noah's face transform with the gentle, patient expression he wore when meeting traumatized children. It was an expression Vincent had never seen before Vivian's exposure, as if his son had discovered that his own suffering had equipped him with superpower, the ability to make other hurt children feel seen and safe. "Hi, Lily," Noah said softly, stopping his wheelchair a respectful distance away so he wouldn't overwhelm the frightened child. "I'm Noah. I like your butterfly backpack." Lily didn't respond verbally, but her grip on her mother's hand loosened slightly as she studied this boy in a wheelchair who spoke to her like she mattered. "Would you like to see my room?" Noah continued, his voice carrying the same patient gentleness Rebecca had once used with him. "I have a really cool communication device that can make funny sounds, and my daddy built me a reading corner with lights that change colors." For the first time since arriving, Lily made eye contact with Noah. Something passed between them, an understanding that only children who had survived the unthinkable could share. Over the next several hours, Vincent watched the magic that had become routine at their weekend retreats. Lily gradually emerged from her shell as she played alongside Noah and the other children. Emma worked with the newer teenagers, sharing her story of survival and academic success. The parents attended support groups led by Amanda Cross, who had become the Foundation's Director of Family Services. By afternoon, Lily was using Noah's communication device to speak her first words in months. "Thank you for not being scared of me." The simple message, delivered through synthesized speech that Noah knew intimately, brought tears to every adult's eyes. But Noah simply smiled and replied, "Nobody here is scared of anybody. We're all just kids figuring out how to be happy." As evening approached and families began heading home, Vincent found himself alone with Noah on their back patio, watching the sunset paint their therapeutic garden in shades of gold and amber. It had become their favorite time of day, a quiet moment to process the weekend's healing and reconnect as father and son. "Daddy," Noah said, his natural voice thoughtful in the gentle twilight, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if the bad lady had never come to our house?" Vincent considered the question seriously. "What do you think would have happened?" "I think we would have stayed broken in different ways," Noah replied with startling insight. "You would have stayed sad about Mummy and worked too much, and I would have stayed lonely and scared. Maybe we needed something terrible to happen so we could learn how to love each other the right way." The profundity of his 9-year-old son's observation took Vincent's breath away. Noah was right. The trauma that had nearly destroyed them had also been the catalyst for their healing, not just as individuals, but as a family. "You know what I think?" Vincent said, reaching over to take Noah's hand. "I think Mummy sent us exactly what we needed, even though it didn't look like what we wanted." Noah nodded solemnly. "Like how medicine tastes bad, but makes you better. Exactly like that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies begin to dance among the garden's adaptive pathways. The mansion around them hummed with the peaceful energy of a home filled with purpose and love. Vincent's phone, which now stayed in his pocket during family time, buzzed occasionally with messages from Foundation staff, documentary producers, and the countless families whose lives had been touched by their story. "Daddy," Noah said as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Yes, son. I'm happy." Two simple words that contained the entire universe of their transformation. Vincent felt his heart swell with a joy so pure and complete that it seemed impossible his chest could contain it. "Me too, Noah. Me too." As they headed inside to prepare for another week of healing work, Foundation activities, and the beautiful routine of their new life, Vincent caught sight of their reflection in the kitchen window. A father pushing his son's wheelchair, both of them laughing at something Noah had said about the weekend's most dramatic moment. When 6-year-old Tyler had declared that he was going to marry Emma when he grew up, causing her to dissolve in a teenage mortification and the other children to erupt in giggles. They looked like what they were, a family who had survived the worst and chosen to build something better from the pieces. The Worthington Foundation had grown into a multi-million-dollar organization with chapters in 12 states and partnerships with major corporations, universities, and government agencies. Vincent's business empire continued to thrive under the management of executives who understood that their CEO's priorities had evolved beyond profit margins to include social impact and family time. Noah had become a nationally recognized advocate for children with disabilities and abuse survivors, with a documentary about his journey winning the Emmy Award and a children's book he'd co-authored becoming a bestseller used in therapy programs nationwide. But their greatest achievement wasn't measured in awards, recognition, or lives saved, though all of those mattered deeply. Their greatest achievement was the laughter that filled their home each morning, the easy conversations that stretched late into the evening, and the absolute certainty they both carried that they were exactly where they belonged. As Vincent tucked Noah into bed that night, his son looked up at him with eyes that sparkled with contentment and mischief in equal measure. "Tomorrow is Mother's Day," Noah said thoughtfully. "I want to put flowers on Mummy's grave and tell her about Lily learning to talk again." Vincent's throat tightened with emotion, but it was the good kind, the kind that came from gratitude rather than grief. "I think that's a beautiful idea. What else do you want to tell her?" Noah considered this with the careful attention he gave all important questions. "I want to tell her that her little boy isn't broken anymore, and that her husband learned how to be the daddy she always knew he could be." Vincent leaned down and kissed his son's forehead, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and the indefinable sweetness that was uniquely Noah. "And I want to tell her," Vincent added softly, "that love really does win in the end." "Always," Noah agreed, his eyes already growing heavy with sleep. "Love always wins." As Vincent turned off the lights and settled into the comfortable chair beside Noah's bed, a ritual they'd maintained even after Noah's nightmares stopped, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect peace. 2 years ago, he'd been a man who thought he had everything but felt empty. Tonight, he was a man who had what mattered most and felt complete. The shocking truth was that sometimes the worst thing that could happen to a family was also the thing that saved it. Sometimes love needed to be broken before it could be rebuilt stronger. Sometimes the people who tried to destroy us ended up showing us exactly who we were meant to become. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, you got to discover that the most extraordinary thing in your life had been right there all along. You just needed to learn how to truly see it. Vincent Worthington closed his eyes, listening to his son's peaceful breathing, and fell asleep knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families to help, and new opportunities to choose love over fear. In a world that often felt broken, they had built something beautiful together, a father and son who had learned that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the depth of connection between two hearts that had chosen to heal together. The story that began with a billionaire's shocking discovery ended with a father's greatest treasure, the absolute certainty that he was exactly who his child needed him to be. Love, it turned out, really did win in the end. 5 years later, the Worthington Foundation has helped rescue over 2,000 children from abusive situations and provided healing support to more than 10,000 families. Noah Worthington, now 14, continues his advocacy work while excelling academically in mainstream classes with minimal accommodations. He plans to study law and social work in college, with the goal of becoming the first disabled person to argue a child protection case before the Supreme Court. Vincent Worthington was named Humanitarian of the Year by the United Nations, but his favorite recognition remains the handmade card Noah gave him last Father's Day that simply read, "To the best daddy in the whole world. Thank you for seeing me." Sometimes the most shocking thing a parent can do is simply love their child exactly as they are. Thanks for sticking with this story till the very end. But trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. The next story is crazier, more shocking, and will blow your mind. Click the image on your screen now and dive right in. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a single twist.